So given that we have already been here for 50 minutes,
So I think
the presentation, I asked Richard Stern if he would like to talk and show slides of the birds, and many of you see his amazing pictures, I think, almost daily if you follow Facebook. He's very good at posting them there. So I asked him if he would give a somewhat shorter presentation than usual, and he has put some slides together. So Richard, thank you so much, and take it away. Well, so there's everybody. Okay. Thanks for your patience. Here we go.
Are you seeing this now?
Yes,
yep.
we are.
Yeah, okay. We're fine.
I can't see myself, but
no, but that's okay. You don't need to see yourself.
Yeah, I don't need to see myself. All right. So, well, I apologize for not being able to do that properly, but
nobody panicked, and we are there now.
Excellent. So I'm still getting used to Zoom, although it works well once it does indeed work. So a few weeks ago, Soren emailed me and asked me if I would be prepared to show my, as he put it, fabulous pictures, and it would tie in with the BNS's biodiversity theme. So I thought for a little bit, a few minutes anyway, and said, okay, I'll give it a try. I am somewhat diffident because other people these days take more fabulous pictures than I do, but I feel that some of my pictures are okay anyway. A lot of people seem to like looking at them. I know very little about biodiversity, although I've been able to look some stuff up since preparing this talk. And what I've done is I am going to show some pictures of birds that illustrate biodiversity locally and nationally and internationally in one way or another. And there may well be people in the audience who know a lot more about biodiversity than I do, and there may well be people in the audience who know a lot more about photography than I do. So if so, I hope you enjoy this anyway. So just by way of introduction, most of you probably know that there was a study that was commissioned by Cornell just a few years ago, and it was widely publicized. And it was estimated that in North America, we have lost 2.9 billion birds since about 1970. And this was published actually last year. If you think about it, the world population has gone from about 5 billion to 8 billion since 1970. So that's 3 billion. So approximately since 1970, for every one person that was born, we have lost one bird. It's a kind of a sobering thought, and it puts into perspective what's going on. There have been a number of other similar studies, and this one illustrates long-term changes in bird populations by species group. And this was also published last year, and it was commissioned or created at least by Birds Canada, which used to be Bird Studies Canada. It's interesting that in terms of waterfowl, birds of prey, wetland birds, to a lesser extent seabirds and forest birds, the number of species and the total, they looked at 26 species of waterfowl, 17 species of birds of prey, and so on. And this group of birds have actually increased, whereas shorebirds, grassland birds, and aerial insectivores have decreased. And aerial insectivores and grassland birds in particular, the number of species and the total populations have decreased fairly drastically during this 45-year period of time. However, the total of all species, when you average these out, as you can see, is about 40% have increased and about 40% have decreased. So in Canada, at least, it looks as if the variety of birds is being replaced. So aerial insectivores grassland birds and shorebirds are being slowly replaced by wetland birds, birds of prey, and waterfowl. So just to illustrate this with a few pictures, here is an aerial insectivore eating an aerial insect. And of course, this is a tree swallow. Now, the local tree swallow population, to me at least, and I'm going to talk about what I think about a lot of this, seems to be doing very well, largely because a lot of people put up tree swallow boxes and look at my crib sheet here. A lot of people put up tree swallow boxes, and the population seems to be doing okay. And the information from Cornell, who quote various scientific organizations and organizations like COSIWIG and Birds Canada, Cornell themselves, and so forth, looking at the official status of some of these birds. In North America overall, the total tree swallow population appears to be fairly stable. Next one is a bank swallow. And I took this picture very close to the bank swallow colony in Avonport, which I know has been present for many, many years. But like nearly all bank swallow colonies around here, at least, the total numbers are decreasing and have decreased rapidly. We're currently staying in Avonport. We have a cottage here. And during the summer, the maximum number that I was able to count by looking through a scope at the colony, looking at the nesting holes and so on, was about 50. There used to be many hundreds. And again, rather oddly, the information on birds of the world from Cornell suggests that bank swallow populations throughout North America are actually relatively stable. As you will be able to see, I rather enjoy taking pictures of birds in flight, so I use very high shutter speeds to do that. I do a fair amount of post-processing to increase sharpness and crop and all that kind of stuff. But what I don't do is use Photoshop to either take things away or add things or make the bird look as if it's something else, and so on and so forth. So anyway, that's a bank swallow. Another bird that does seem to be decreasing, and certainly around here it's very much decreasing, is cliff swallow. This is a part of a colony on the door of a church not far from here, and sort of slightly west of Wolfville. I don't know how old this colony is, but the church has not been used since the pandemic started. And I wonder if that in itself has sort of encouraged the birds to build their nests in this typical fashion on the door of the church, because nobody goes in the church at the moment. Maybe that colony will also disappear after COVID. So in one sense, pandemics are good for birds. And this picture just shows one of the cliff swallows leaving one of the nest holes. When I took the picture, I was in my car, didn't disturb anything, and the birds, the adult birds, were quite happily flying in with insects and feeding the youngs, which you can see in the nest here. And here is another aerial insectivore, a bird that totally relies on catching insects in flight. Of course, this is the flying cigar, and if the BNS had an avian logo, this probably should be it, because it's a chimney swift. Unfortunately, I've only got a very few old pictures, which are actually on slides, of the large numbers of chimney swifts entering the chimney, and I've no idea how to get them. They're lying in a heap in a box somewhere in a basement while we are downsizing and moving. But this is a chimney swift that actually flew low enough to take a decent picture, and I was on the rail trail in Wolfville when this bird flew over. They are also drastically decreasing in terms of population, certainly around here, although apparently not so much over North America as a whole. And of course, the reason for all these aerial insectivores disappearing is that there are less insects, less flying insects around, and there are all kinds of possible reasons for that. And it may be related to global climate change as well, because there's now more of a disconnect between when the insects are sort of hatching and forming clouds of insects in the air, and when the migrating birds, which all of these are, of course, are actually coming back and breeding. They breed when the insects are no longer as numerous as they should be. And also, of course, the use of pesticides and various other methods of killing insects. In addition, with chimney swifts, there are far fewer chimneys than there used to be. And of course, the BNS is doing a great job of maintaining the chimney in Wolfville. So the next group of birds that is declining big time are grassland breeding birds. This is a bobolink. It's related biologically to red-winged blackbirds and grackles and so forth, but of course, as you can see, the male and breeding plumage is a beautiful bird. It also has a very bubbly and very happy song, which is great to listen to. I took this picture at Belle Isle Marsh a number of years ago. And there was one day when I was at Belle Isle Marsh, there were about 50 bobolinks in a particular field. I went back 1 week later, the field had been mowed and there were none. And this is now an obvious problem locally, where many of the fields that bobolinks used to nest in are now planted with GM corn and soya beans and nothing else. And the plantings go right to the edge of the field with no sort of, or very few ditches and little areas of wild long grass for the bobolinks to nest in. They also are long distance migrants, and they have two other areas of particular problem. One is, like all long distance migrants, on the southern facing coast of the USA, northern Florida, Alabama, Texas, and so on. Trees where they were able to rest and feed now being replaced by condominiums and so forth. Although again, with climate change, a lot of the human activity there is sort of getting less because of hurricanes and other weather events. There is something rather peculiar or particular to bobolinks as well, in that they winter in Venezuela in wild rice fields, and with the political situation and the financial situation in Venezuela, there are an awful lot of people who don't like birds invading their one food source. So they shoot the birds, and they also pick the rice before the birds get there. So bobolinks are in trouble from 3 points of view. So another grassland bird, I didn't take this picture locally, and it's not a red-tailed hawk. I took this picture in Alberta just before the pandemic, and it's a ferruginous hawk. This is a grassland raptor. It's a large buteo, slightly bigger than a red-tailed hawk, very pale looking. It does have a slightly pinkish tail, but there are a number of other features about it that are different from a red-tailed hawk in terms of field marks. But this is another bird that's fairly drastically disappearing, and it's bucking the trend of birds of prey in general increasing. This one is decreasing, again, because of problems with grasslands. And in particular, modern farming practices do not allow for their prey, sort of gophers, rats, chipmunks, other small mammals, to proliferate as much as they used to. Here's another grassland bird that we rarely see in Nova Scotia. This picture was in Alberta on the same trip, an upland sandpiper. We do very rarely see them in Nova Scotia as vagrants, but again, this is a typical example of a grassland breeding bird that for all the usual reasons is declining fairly drastically. The other sort of global issue or North American issue with grasslands in general is that a lot of prairie habitat has been replaced with large-scale farms with intensive farming practices. And so, this is not good for birds that really rely on the original prairie type of habitat. So that sort of segues into shorebirds. When you see pictures like this, taken at the Guzzle, you'd think, well, surely shorebirds aren't in danger, but they are. These are all semi-palmated sandpipers. I don't think there are any different ones in this particular picture. If anybody likes the idea of jigsaw puzzles, this one would make a good Guzzle puzzle, if you want to say that. but the numbers are definitely lower than they used to be. Used to be common to see 50,000. Now it's more like 10,000 at the most. And there are a number of possible reasons for that. And the BNS has been involved in the last few years with a project together with Dalhousie University called Space to Roost, which is trying to find out if there are any significant problems on migration in this area, which are affecting the population of the shorebirds in general and semi-palmated sandpipers in particular. And there are several possible problems, and I'm not sure that we've really got an answer yet. One is the proliferation of peregrine falcons and other predators. A second one is the proliferation of birders and bird photographers who like to get close and therefore disturb them. And the third is fishermen. My own personal view is that it's more likely to be peregrines, unfortunately, because I like to see them. The fishermen don't seem to mind and don't seem to interfere with the shorebirds at all. You can go down to the Guzzle, talk to fishermen, and while you're doing so, semi and least sandpipers are sort of scuttling around your feet with no problem at all. And a lot of the fishermen seem to like seeing the shorebirds as well. Here's a rather iconic shorebird, which the population is still stable. This is a piping plover. You can tell that by its overall very pale plumage, and it's typical plover, small bill. The population in North America is scattered. It's very low to begin with, and because it's very low and sort of scattered, and it likes to nest on nice sandy, sunny beaches, which is what we like to occupy as well, and so do our dogs. So for those reasons, although the population is probably stable, it's difficult to census them because we don't really know where all of them nest. But because the numbers are low in the first place, the bird is potentially in trouble. Luckily, we do have piping plover guardians, who are people that volunteer to sort of guard over the nests and keep away people, dogs off leashes, and so on and so forth. So in Nova Scotia, they're actually remaining fairly stable. So next we come to a group of forest birds, which are also declining overall. This, for the non-birders who might be looking, this is not a chickadee, this is a blackpoll warbler, which breeds sort of in the scrubby forests between the tundra and the boreal forest, right across Canada, more east than west. And it's famous for its long-distance migrations. So this is the breeding plumage with the black head. It's basically a black and white bird, got these nice bright yellow feet. They migrate in the fall through Atlantic Canada and northeastern US, and then they fly non-stop to South America and keep going until they reach sort of the rainforest in the Amazon area and other areas of northern Brazil and similar latitudes. So it's a huge migration for a tiny bird. And in the spring, when they come back, they tend to follow a different path, which is kind of odd, but a lot of birds do that. They tend to go more up the central flyway without coming through our area. There are a few that breed in Nova Scotia, particularly in the sort of more boreal forested type areas like offshore islands such as Seal Island, Briar Island, shores of Cape Breton and so forth. Believe it or not, for the non-birders, this is the same species, but in a different plumage. They molt, all birds molt, all birds lose feathers as they wear, and they need feathers in good condition to migrate, and long-distance migrants in particular tend to molt their feathers before they actually migrate. So this is another blackpoll warbler. The one thing it has retained, or two things it's retained, are the white wing bars and the bright yellow feet. I took this picture just 3 or 4 weeks ago in New and there was a sort of bloom of little caterpillar-like things, I'm not sure exactly what they were, along a pathway between the Baptist church and the rail trail in New and the trees were full of blackpoll and palm warblers with the occasional Cape May, and there was even a prothonotary warbler. But this is a non-breeding plumaged blackpoll. Here is what I think is our prettiest of all the warblers. This is a Blackburnian warbler with a very fiery looking throat, and this one was in full song. Over North America as a whole, the population is relatively stable, and they seem to be here as well. They're not easy to find because unless you've got very good hearing, they have a very soft song, which doesn't really have any, it's not like a chestnut-sided that sings pleased to meet you, or a black-throated green that sings zee 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 zoo zee. This has a very soft and variable, high-pitched, buzzy sort of song, and every time it sings, the song is a little bit different. There are a few places where they do seem to be regularly found. One of them is at the top of that steep trail that goes down from the picnic ground to the river in the Kentville Research Station. And if you're careful and if you stand around early in the morning on a late spring or early summer morning, you can hear and see Blackburnian warblers, which this one is. Okay, here's another long distance migrant warbler, which is another very pretty one, which also has a very distinctive song. It sort of goes like that. And this is called a northern parula. And the word parula comes from the Latin or Greek, I'm not sure which means it's sort of like a chickadee, which it isn't, except that it's about the same size. These are one of our more common breeding warblers and one of our more common migrating ones as well. The population around here seems to be stable, but again, there's a lot of selection bias in censusing a lot of these birds, because parula warblers are easy to see and easy to hear, whereas some other warblers are much more localized and harder to see and even harder to hear. And so in surveys like the Breeding Bird Survey and even eBird and bird atlasing and so forth, which rely a lot on amateur birders, even though they may be very accomplished and very good, they don't have the skill to census sort of deep forests or what happens at night and so on and so forth. So there's always a bit of a selection bias. The next group of birds that are on the decline big time are seabirds. There's a puffin flying close to Pearl Island, which is just visible on the horizon off Peggy's Cove. Some members of the Nova Scotia Bird Society organize 3-hour trips. You're not allowed to land on the island, but the trips will leave Peggy's Cove early in the morning, go out, circle around the island a couple of times and see the puffins, tree-wakes, razorbills and so forth, which breed there. The North American population of puffins is apparently fairly stable, but the worldwide population is crashing. In Scotland and Iceland and Scandinavia, where there used to be, it's about 5 or 6 years ago, and we only saw half a dozen or so puffins. Now, I have eaten puffin in Iceland in the past. I must say it's horrible taste, but part of the reason for the decline of puffins and other large colony nesting seabirds, at least in the eastern part of the Atlantic Ocean, North Atlantic, is thought to be the changing sea temperature, which has affected fish prey. Here's another bird that is very difficult to census. It's very rare in Nova Scotia. It's a roseate tern. You can tell that by the color of its bill, and you may not be able to see it on this screen, but it does have a slightly pinkish underside. And the pattern of black on the wingtips is different from the more common and Arctic terns. It has a different sound as well. There's one fairly large colony on the islands called the Brothers, which is just off West Pubnico. There's another colony off Country Harbour in northeastern Nova Scotia, which I think is potentially in trouble because it's close to a place where they want to build an oil depot for shipping oil. Although it breeds right across the northern hemisphere, but in very scattered sort of areas and scattered colonies. So again, it's to some extent threatened. Beautiful bird. I just love seeing roseate terns. So now we come to freshwater birds, if you like. This is a pied-billed grebe, and we're in Nova Scotia. We're right pretty much on the edge of its natural breeding range. They seem to be doing okay here, and in fact, I think their numbers are probably slowly increasing here. When I first came to Nova Scotia and started birding, they were very rare vagrants indeed. Now you can find them on quite a lot of large ponds. They're regular at Miners Marsh, and they're regular on the French Basin Trail in Annapolis and so forth. Although apparently right across North America, their numbers are declining. And here's a sort of vaguely related one. This is called a sora. It's technically a family called a crake, although a lot of people call them a rail. Strictly speaking, crakes have short, thick bills, and rails have long, narrow bills. So a sora, it's a crake, but everybody just calls them sora. They're easily heard, but very hard to see. This particular individual was being very cooperative, and for several days prancing around on these lily pads in the National Historic Ground Prairie this summer. And some freshwater around here, at least they're being more often seen, reported, and I see them more and more. This is a hooded merganser male, and right now, in the middle of November, they seem to be all over the place on fresh water. They're present at various local sewage plants, they're present at Miners Marsh, they're present at Silver Lake, and so forth. So it didn't used to be the case. They seem to be increasing. And here's a lot of people's favorite looking duck. It's certainly very spectacular. It's another one that seems to be increasing. I think there are old ducks nesting, and now there are some ducks that basically live on the sea. This, of course, is a common eider, and I don't know what's happened to them around here. When I first came to the valley, which was about 40 years ago, you could go to almost any point between Scotts Bay and Digby, I guess, and see huge flocks of eiders, scoters, all three scoters, and common eiders, and redneck grebes, and various other seabirds. Now you see hardly any, and I don't know where they've gone. And I've asked various people what's happened to our eiders on the Bay of Fundy. Nobody can give me a real answer, and I suspect it's because nobody knows. They're doing okay elsewhere. In Iceland, of course, they're a national treasure, and they're economically important because people make eider down out of the down that the females put in the nests. But this is an eider. This year, we seem to be doing well around Briar Island. There are a lot of known nests there, and the numbers this year were certainly better than the last few years. But I haven't noticed that they're any better in the upper Bay of Fundy, which is where we are. I was out at Black Rock today, actually, in the pouring rain. I did see 2 eiders, and I think 4 years ago it would have been more like 22 or 52. So I don't know where they're all going. And here's another one. Whoops, let's go back here. What are you doing? Yeah, there we go. Well, not sure what's happening here. Anyway, these are brant, and these are a type of goose which rely on eelgrass to feed on. And again, this is a species that, at least around here, seems to be declining big time. We used to be able to go down Briar Island in the late winter or early spring and see flocks of several hundred of these. They used to have a brant festival on Cape Sable Island, but they've given that up because there are hardly any brant there anymore. Same with Briar Island. Brant are ecologically very important because in the UK, they wanted to build a third airport for London out on a marsh in the county of Essex. And it was the fact that endangered brant used that as their wintering ground that was one of the main reasons that they were not allowed to build London's third airport right there. These are small geese, and they breed high in the Arctic. So we'll come now to another group of birds which is increasing. I like to go from bad news, in other words, birds that are decreasing, to end on a good note, birds that are increasing. And of course, this is a peregrine falcon, taken at the Guzzle this fall. And it was just starting a dive. And what they do, of course, is they catch flying birds. In a dive, they're the fastest living creature on Earth. They are becoming more common, and in fact, they're becoming urban birds, basically. I don't know if this is one of the pair that regularly nest by the lighthouse in between Avonport and Hansport. It may be, but I think there are too many peregrines around just to account for those. And a few of them you can occasionally recognize as being from the Arctic because they have a slightly different pattern on their head. They have a narrower moustachial band, which is this little area there. This is an adult peregrine. You can tell by the patterning of the streaks on the belly there. They're becoming a rather urban bird, and they're now known to nest in many cities on towers, apartment blocks, bridges, and other tall structures. And they feed mainly on pigeons, ducks in the park, and starlings. Another spot you can easily see peregrines if you miss them at the Guzzle around here is along the roads and the fields near that plant that used to be called canard poultry. I believe now it's food for mink. It certainly smells like that. But there are huge flocks of starlings, and quite often there's a peregrine or two that flies around and catches starlings in midair. But they are increasing. And so these guys, this is of course a red-tailed hawk. The adult is easy to recognize because it's got a red tail, or at least a brownish red tail. I just like this picture because it's very easy to take pictures of a red-tailed hawk from below when it's soaring slowly around in circles above you. You just point the camera and press the button. But it's a little different to get one from above against snow. And it was actually obviously hunting. It was flying very fast down to catch something. Red-tailed hawks are pretty common around here, and the local breeding population is augmented by birds that come down from further north. Now, in terms of biodiversity, it may be that biologists are always lumping or splitting species. And what I mean by that is they don't really lump or split actual species. They lump or split the sort of scientific names and what constitutes an actual species. There are many subspecies or races, if you want to call it that, of red-tailed hawks across North America. There are two that are really good candidates for being split, called Criders and Harlands red-tailed hawks, which have very localized breeding areas and characteristic plumages. But there's one that occurs here, which is called the northern red-tailed hawk, which has different markings than our local breeding ones. It's very confusing because our local breeding ones, the subspecies name is borealis, which actually means northern. And the northern one's subspecies name is abieticola, which means fir tree loving. So it's confusing. But some people believe that one of these days those red-tailed hawks will be split. Here's another hawk, which around here I believe is becoming less common. But they've recently discovered, this is a sharp-shinned hawk, and they very recently discovered that by DNA analysis, sharp-shinned hawks on a number of Caribbean islands, for example, are actually different species. So here's an example of scientific research and using modern techniques such as DNA analysis is showing that biodiversity in some situations or in some respects is actually increasing because the number of species that were thought to be one are now split into several. This is an accipiter. It's a hawk that has a long, thin tail, and it's got a sort of sharp angle at the edges of the tail. It's got a small head with quite an angle between the forehead and the beak here. And when it's soaring or when it's gliding, it holds its wings rather forward. And even though this is not a full adult, it's got a splodgy looking chest and neck. That makes it a sharp-chinned hawk. Unlike the next one, which is also an accipiter, but it's got the outer tail feathers are shorter than the central ones. It tends to hold its wings more straight, and it looks kind of fiercer, and there's no angle between the forehead and the beak. And the markings on the chest are much more neat and sort of narrow. And this is a Cooper's hawk. It's not always easy or not always even possible if you only get a slight glimpse to distinguish the two species by sight or sound for that matter. But this bird seems to be expanding its range dramatically. And in the last 2 or 3 years, for every one sharp-shinned hawk that I've seen, I've probably seen 3 or 4 Cooper's hawks in this area. And we've had at least 2 known nests, and there are probably a whole lot more. And I'm told that Cooper's hawks really like mourning doves for their meals. And of course, the mourning dove population has increased dramatically here as well. So I think Cooper's hawks are increasing too. They're also, to some extent, urban birds. They don't mind hanging around backyards and bird feeders. Here's another bird that seems to be increasing locally, turkey vulture. This is one of a flock of 10 or more that seems to have been hanging around Canning for the last year or so. They never used to be this far up. They've been on Briar Island and Yarmouth County for some time, but the numbers, the bird is spreading. So in terms of biodiversity, they are increasing to our local biodiversity as well. People think that they're sort of ugly looking, but that's only on the ground. I think they're very spectacular birds when they're flying like this. I have mixed feelings about bald eagles. They look very dramatic, of course, and they're our neighbors to the south. It's their national bird. But I like to tease Americans by saying around here they should really be called dead chicken hawks, because that's what they like to eat more than anything else. Because of the popularity of bald eagles and the fact that farmers put out dead chickens, and now we have an eagle festival, which is great fun, and they have very nice breakfasts and bands and so forth. But to see 150 or 200 eagles in the trees there in Sheffield Mills, all waiting to pounce on a bunch of dead chickens, somehow doesn't seem very natural. And the population of bald eagles, there are lots of nests around here as well, which are usually relatively easy to see. There's several in Wolfville, Grand Pré, New Minas, and elsewhere. But bald eagles are known now to be interfering with loon chicks, seabird colonies, and so forth. I don't know whether the local population of bald eagles now is greater than it was in sort of historical times, or whether it's the same after a decline, but they have, advantages and disadvantages. But nevertheless, there are now more bald eagles than there used to be. Another bird that I'm just going to illustrate a couple of birds here which are sort of on the brink of becoming common in Nova Scotia. They're not quite there yet, but I'll bet you in 10 or 20 years they will be, and therefore to some extent are also increasing our local biodiversity. This one is a lesser black-backed gull. It's a little bit smaller and a slightly different shape than a herring gull. They have bright yellow legs, particularly in breeding plumage. This one's not in breeding plumage because it's got all this dark markings around its head. You see more of them on migration in the winter. As yet, at least the last time I read, which was pretty recently, there are no known breeding records in North America, but they are becoming increasingly common. And just the other day, I was looking at an article which showed there was a picture of 200 lesser black-backed gulls on a beach. I think that was in Texas somewhere. They're basically a Eurasian bird, which is slowly colonizing North America. And I think it's going to be a common breeder in Nova Scotia one day in the future. Here's another one, which we know has been increasing its range and is being seen more and more in Nova Scotia, and therefore adding to the biodiversity here. These are sandhill cranes. These three were in a field not far from Aylesford a few years ago, and they seem to be, there's a little colony of them in the Shubenacadie area. People keep seeing them and reporting them. I think that would be very nice to have these nesting in Nova Scotia. They're pretty spectacular and they sound great. And they are indeed spreading. I'm just going to mention a few very odd sightings of one-off sort of raptors. This is how breeding populations get established sometimes. One bird will appear somewhere, and if it's lucky, it'll find a mate. And if it's successful, it'll start a breeding colony. A few years ago, over a period of about 4 years, there were 4 northern or crested caracaras seen around Nova Scotia. The first one was seen at Lawrencetown Beach, and then there was one seen in Canso, one down Yarmouth, Cape Sagal Island, I think, and this one that appeared in the valley. And this picture was actually taken just along the road from Gasper Road, just before Slater Road. It's related to falcons. It's native to Central America, in particular Mexico, where I think it's the national bird. They're very successful, they're sort of alpha birds where they occur. And it was thought to be very peculiar that, well, there had to be only one bird. I mean, to see a caracara in Nova Scotia would be incredibly rare. But Ian McLaren analyzed a number of pictures that people managed to get, and there were patterns in the wingtips and of individual feathers that showed that all 4 sightings were actually 4 different birds. I don't think any have been seen since, but this is the sort of thing that starts a breeding colony somewhere. I had to put this in. This is another one that's completely sort of off the wall. Until recently, who would have thought this would be the most unlikely bird to be seen in Nova Scotia? This is a zone-tailed hawk. Rick Whitman and I saw it flying over Briar Island on the 1st of June, 4 or 5 years ago. Again, native to sort of Mexico and just reaching into Arizona and southern Texas. And they also occur further south in Central America. Again, there was one previous record, although apparently some people are now scrutinizing the rather sort of fuzzy pictures and wondering if that really was a zone-tailed hawk. But the previous record, I think, was in the 1970s in the Muscogoblet Valley somewhere. So again, this is an example of something that, if it happened to find a second zone-tailed hawk here, well, maybe we'll see them as a breeding colony. And why these birds of prey should be wandering thousands of kilometers away from where they're supposed to be is really sort of anybody's guess. And of course, the most amazing one of all was featured on, did anybody else see the little interview with Diane LeBlanc on Global National this evening at about 5 to 7? This is the Stellus sea eagle, which, again, it's been recognized as an individual bird because of the one feather that's slightly off kilter in the left wing. And it was first seen in Alaska, later it was seen in Texas, then it was seen in New Brunswick, and about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Phil Taylor found it sitting on the mud flat in Falmouth. This is not a fabulous photo, as Soren would put it, but it's the only one I could get because the sun was setting. The yellow sky is real. That was the actual color because the sun actually sets a few minutes later and the eagle became impossible to see. But you can see its enormous beak and the white on its shoulder here. Other people have got much better pictures of it. And It's one of the rarest eagles in the world. The total world population is estimated to be about 60,000. It's native to northeastern China and the coast of eastern Russia. It migrates to Japan in the winter and occasionally wanders to Alaska. So why it's here, I don't know. I somehow can't believe that Steller sea eagles would ever become resident in Nova Scotia, but with climate change and with all these wandering raptors, who knows? They feed on fish. We still have plenty of those, so maybe. This is my last slide, I think. And this is another bird. It's a vagrant. It's been seen by a lot of birders 3 or 4 weeks ago. But it's one that, again, is certainly possible to become a breeder in Nova Scotia in the future. It's a scissor-tailed flycatcher, and it's related to all the other flycatchers we have here. This one is about the 12th or 15th sighting in Nova Scotia. And again, their population is slowly expanding northwards. They're quite common in Texas. And it's a pretty nice looking bird, as you can see. So I think that is it. There we are. And that's basically all I'm going to say, except that I hope you've enjoyed some of these pictures, and I hope I've made a little bit of sense, both a little bit of interest in trying to correlate them with biodiversity.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Richard. And I don't know of many people that take as nice pictures as you do, but so
Well,
thanks very much. I realize it is late. I just wonder if there are any maybe quick questions that anybody has before we end. And if you have a question, you can put it in the chat box, or just unmute yourself if you have a question for Richard. I think it is really interesting how like, especially birds, because they can fly, they can change and arrive in new areas. And if, if you have one mating pair, then that can become a population. And I always think of the cattle egrets that blew over from Africa and landed in Florida and basically started the cattle egret populations in North America. So this is how new species, get here. They get here by accident and become established if the habitat is there, and if they can survive. So anyway, thank you so much, everybody, for joining the BNS this evening for the AGM, and for Richard's, I'll still say it, fabulous pictures of birds and knowledge of birds. It's really quite a treasure to have you in the BNS, Richard. So thanks very much. Thank you, everybody. And the next meeting, remember the December meeting is the second Monday of December as opposed to the third Monday. And in December, we will hear from Matthew. Oh, here I go with names again. I'm sorry. The park ecologist at Ketchi National Park. He will be talking about the role of parks in the conservation of biodiversity. So I think that should be that will be very interesting. I have known Matthew for a long time. He was a student at Acadia, and he kindly agreed to give the December presentation. So thanks, everybody, and see you in December.